In previous sermons, I've shared what it's like growing up with parents who were musicians, and as I've said before, it was rarely boring. I felt at times that my experience was a bit different than some of my friends. Music and instruments filled the house day and night. From as early as I can remember, while a lot of my friends weren't even really listening to music or music that was just geared towards kids, I was listening to music that was a lot older and I thought much cooler. I remember being around 6 years old, sitting in my living room with a little gray and blue toy cassette player listening to Motown classics from the 60s. And I loved it. I thought it was so neat. And one of my favorite groups was a group called The Temptations. I remember thinking, boy, these guys were cool. They had these matching jackets and these slick moves, and they were singing songs. Just some of my favorites, like, I know you want to leave me, but I refuse to let you go. And My Girl and Get Ready, Here We Come. And I love that music. I still listen to that music today. Another difference that I noticed from a lot of my friends was, well, often on weekends they were spending their time playing with toys and video games or going to skating parties or family get-togethers. My family was usually performing somewhere. Or maybe when they weren't performing, we'd be going to Philadelphia to hear a jazz group. And eventually, as I got older and into playing myself, I would often get a chance to sit in with many of these groups that we would hear. And it was a really transformative experience when I was at that age. It was awesome, being blessed with parents who were really supportive of my interest in music and continually seeking out environments where I could hone my skills as a jazz pianist and organist and get a chance to work with other musicians. I also got to stay up a lot later than many of my friends, too. Jazz music was my particular interest, and it was great getting a chance to jam with musicians who were many years older than I was. Because I was so young, many of them really did take an interest in me performing and teaching me. Most of the musicians I encountered as a kid entering the music scene were very supportive. And some of my most vivid and meaningful memories come from sitting in at those jam sessions and those concerts with everyone from local jazz musicians to some Grammy Award-winning recording artists. The best part of this experience was the sense of unity I felt with those other musicians, a sense of being part of something that was bigger than myself. Music, particularly jazz, was a scene where people of all ages, genders, background, sizes, ethnicities, socioeconomic levels, and stages of life came together for a common purpose: to create great music. So when I read this psalm, and in particular when I read the line, "How very good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity," I thought about my days growing up as a young jazz musician. Now, the question that really stood out to me after reading this short psalm was, how can we as followers of Jesus come together in unity when there is so much that divides us? I also think of the true greatness that we could achieve in community if we were able to be more united as followers of Jesus. As I pondered this question, I thought back to those jazz jam sessions that I used to attend. Here was an environment where the most diverse group of people would come together in unity to achieve something great. The psalmist writes of the beauty of unity. Old Testament scholar Adele Berlin argues that uniting the people of Israel is the main theme of the psalm. When the psalm talks about the precious oil poured on the head and running down, this is the imagery of an entire people being anointed together. The imagery of the dew of Hermon falling on Mount Zion. Hermon represents the people of the northern kingdom, while Zion represents the center of the southern kingdom of Israel. The psalmist writes of the beauty it would be to see those kingdoms come together in unity. As a musician and lover of music, I can say that it is a thing of beauty when people come together in unity and harmony to achieve something. One of the most meaningful experiences I shared here, worshiping in this congregation, was hearing 4-part a cappella hymn singing. Everyone coming together with their part, together in harmony and unity. But the major focus in the psalm isn't just the unity of a particular family or group, but the unity of all God's people together. This is the ultimate goodness that God intends, the gathering of God's larger family, the whole people of God. St. Augustine attributed the origin of monasteries and their brotherhoods to this psalm. Monasteries were groups of people from different backgrounds, ages, and places coming together to live in unity and to focus on doing God's work. So I came back to the question, how can we as a people of God come together in unity when there is so much that divides us? What can be gleaned from those early experiences I had as a jazz musician? And I think it starts with thinking about what jazz really is. It's a creative art form that, unlike many other styles of music, you don't necessarily know what something is going to sound like or even what something should sound like before you endeavor to perform it. You have a general outline of where you're going, the songs that you might play, and you have a basic idea of how you're going to get there. You have the melody and the chords, but that's about it. All you have beyond that is your skill, your experience, your ability to work as a team, and the inspiration that you bring at the time. While we can do it on our own, it most often happens in community. When we set out to follow Jesus and do God's work, it's really similar. We set out with things we know we'd like to do, those values that we share, caring for the least among us, freeing the oppressed from the oppressors, to work for peace. We have a general outline as to how we're going to get there, to love God, to love our neighbors, to treat each other with respect. We bring to the table our own unique skills, experiences, abilities, and passions. And while we can work on our own, we work usually in community, with others working for those same shared goals. Now, if you were to sit in at a jazz jam session, generally someone would call out a song that you'd be playing. Someone might say, "Hey everybody, let's play Satin Doll," or "Let's play Girl from Ipanema." They're usually, but not always, as a confirmation of key and maybe the feel that you're about to play the song, but that's about it. It's counted and off you go. You might find yourself with a group of musicians that you personally share little in common with, other than your love of music. You may not even know the names of the people. You may not even speak the same language. But for the duration of that song, you are all working together in unity for a common purpose. I remember one particular jazz jam session that I sat into near Philadelphia, and they had a huge Hammond organ. Hammond organ was a big focus in this jam session, and there were so many people there that literally they were lined up outside just to be able to perform with this small group that was playing. It was amazing. The beauty of jamming together in those environments is that you know the basic idea of what we want to have happen, but you never really know what it's going to sound like until it comes out. And you yourself may play in a completely different way than you ever thought you'd play, just based on the people that you're working with. When we set out on a godly endeavor in community, isn't it much the same way? We may not really know all the people that we're working with, and we may not know exactly how things are going to come out in the end. But what's important is that we take up that endeavor in community and work with one another. While it was awesome living in this world growing up, I will say at times it was a difficult transition back into the so-called real world. As I went through school and other social environments, I came to the unfortunate realization that in many cases the rest of the world didn't operate like it did in those environments. It seemed that people tended to focus more on what makes us different and opposed than that which unites us. In school, I saw lines of division drawn everywhere, based on all those things: age, gender, race, interest, socioeconomic status, and even the clothes people wore. It was discouraging, disheartening, and many times difficult to accept. Even when discussing music, it seemed that lines of division were drawn there. In fact, I even noticed how many times when someone was asked what type of music they liked, they would often respond with what they didn't like. In the jazz world, if you worked with people who were really different, even if they didn't speak that same language, there seemed to be a musical language that everyone could relate to and unite. As I was older and I was able to experience working with jazz musicians from all around the country and even beyond, it was amazing to see that through all those cultural, language, and distance barriers, that we were all still able to work together to achieve some great jazz music. What if, as followers of Jesus, we could share this same level of unity? Being away from the church for a period of my life, I felt at times it was an interesting transition back into church life. While I thought of church as the body of Christ that came together to work for common good in the world, I was surprised to see how many lines of division can be drawn in church. There was a division between conservatives and progressives, those who liked worship a certain way and those who liked worship another way, division between age groups, division on issues like sexuality and the environment. How can we as followers of Jesus unite? If I go back to that comparison of a group of diverse musicians coming together in unity for that common purpose of creating something great, what made it work was a common shared focus on what was to be accomplished. The diversity then became a strength and not a stumbling block. And it's true, it wasn't always successful. I've sat in at many jam sessions where things didn't go as expected and not always in a good way. Maybe someone bit off a little more than they could chew. Maybe someone in the group was a little more concerned about making themselves look good as opposed to working for the common good of the group. Maybe someone just didn't have the skill level they needed to do what they would like to do. But in the times it worked great. And the times that it did work, the focus was on achieving that result and working together with the gifts that each one had. In jazz, before showing up at a jam session like this, you would generally learn a common set of songs called standards that become the framework for what you would use to work together. And as followers of Jesus, don't we have a group of standards that we can all rally around? Those things that we said earlier, loving God and loving neighbors, caring for the least among us, freeing the oppressed from oppressors, working for peace and treating each other with respect. What would it look like if we focus more on the things that unite us and less on the things that divide us? And how can we, as the body of Christ, seek to use our diversity as an asset? The good news that this psalm is celebrating is the beauty that can come from that unity. And I challenge us to think about how we can focus on that unity. How does that look in our environments? How do we spend the time on things that unite rather than divide? And how can we continue to enable church structures to fully use the skills, the experience, the knowledge, and diversity of the church body to the fullest? If we can come together in unity to bring those skills, that knowledge, and that diversity, and our shared drive together, just think of the greatness that we as God's people can achieve. Just think of what that song would sound like. If we can learn to see our diversity as a strength and still unite together as following Jesus, then get ready, because here we come.